The journey of John. John was a farmer. He lived in a small village near the mountains. Every day, John woke up early in the morning. He made tea, ate bread, and then went to his fields. He worked hard in his fields. He grew vegetables like potatoes, carrots, tomatoes, and cucumbers. He also had a few cows. He took care of them and fed them every day. After a long day of work, he would sell the vegetables and milk at the village market. John liked his work, but there was something missing. Sometimes, he felt like he needed more. He felt a sense of longing, as if there was something bigger out there in the world. He dreamed of the big cities he had heard about. He wondered what life was like outside the small village. His friends and family told him stories about busy streets, tall buildings, and people from many different places. But John had never left his village. He had never seen these things for himself. One night, after a tiring day of work, John sat by the fire in his small house. The warm fire crackled and gave off a pleasant light. John looked out of the window and stared at the mountains in the distance. They were big and tall, and they looked so peaceful. But he felt there was more to the world than his small village and the mountains. He closed his eyes and thought about the city. John dreamed about the city that night. In his dream, he saw tall buildings. There were busy streets filled with people. There were cars, buses, and bikes. The people were walking fast, talking to each other, and moving around. There were lights everywhere. Even at night, the streets were bright. John thought, I want to see this for myself. I want to visit the city. I want to see what it is like. The next morning, John woke up with a new sense of purpose. He felt something deep inside him telling him to go. I will go to the city, John decided. I will see the world beyond the mountains. But John didn't have enough money to travel. He needed to save money for the trip. So, he worked harder than ever before. He sold extra vegetables at the market. He worked long hours in the fields. When he didn't work in the fields, he would fix tools or help his neighbors. He didn't spend money on anything else. He didn't buy anything new, and he didn't buy food from the market. Every coin he earned went into a small bag. He saved every penny. Months passed. Slowly, John saved enough money to begin his journey. His family and friends were surprised when he told them his plans. John, why do you want to leave? They asked. The village is peaceful. The city is far away, and it's busy. It is dangerous. What if you get lost? But John was determined. He smiled and said, I have to see it for myself. I have to know what is out there. One day, John packed a small bag with clothes, food, and a few coins. He said goodbye to his mother. Be careful, John, she said. Don't forget us. I won't forget you, Mom, John said. I will come back. I will tell you all about the city. John left his village early in the morning. The sun had just risen, and the air was fresh. The birds were singing, and the sky was clear. John walked along the road that led out of the village. It was a long road, and it was quiet. The grass was green, and the trees were tall. As he walked, John thought about the city. He thought about the people, the buildings, and the busy streets. "I can't wait to see the city," John said to himself. After walking for hours, John stopped for a rest. He sat by a river and drank some water. The river was cold and clear. He felt good. The weather was nice, and the road was not too hard. He looked around and saw a few animals walking by. John smiled. He loved nature, but today he was looking for something different. As the day went on, the road became steeper. The trees became thicker, and the path was harder to walk. But John didn't stop. He kept walking, thinking about the city. "The city is waiting for me," he said. "I will see it soon." That night, John set up a small campfire. He cooked some of the bread he had brought with him. He ate the bread and looked at the stars. The sky was full of stars, and the night was quiet. John felt peaceful, but he also missed his village. He missed his mother, his friends, and the quiet mornings. But John knew that he had to continue his journey. The next day, John walked even more. He passed by a small village. The houses were made of wood, and there was a small market in the center. John went to the market and bought some fresh fruit. It was delicious. He talked to some people in the village and asked for directions to the city. They said, "The city is far. It will take many days to get there. Be careful." John thanked them and continued on his journey. The road was becoming more difficult. The path was long and tiring, but John didn't stop. He thought about the city and how it would feel to be there. "I will rest when I get to the city," he thought. After a few more days of walking, John reached a big town. The town was much bigger than the small village where he had grown up. There were many people, and the streets were busy. John felt excited and nervous at the same time. He had never seen so many people before. The noise was loud, and the buildings were tall. He asked around and found out that there was a train that could take him to the city. John had never been on a train before, but he had enough money now. He bought a ticket and waited for the train. When it arrived, he got on. The train was big and fast. It moved quickly along the tracks. John looked out the window. He saw fields, rivers, and more villages. The countryside passed by so fast. After a few hours, the train finally arrived at the city. The city was even bigger than John had imagined. There were huge buildings everywhere. The streets were full of people, and the noise was loud. There were cars, buses, and bicycles. John looked around, amazed. There were lights everywhere. Even at night, the streets were bright. John walked through the busy streets. He saw many people. Some people were talking, while others were walking fast. There were shops and restaurants. There were parks and tall buildings. John felt overwhelmed, but he was also excited. He wanted to see everything. He went to a park and saw children playing. He watched them run around and laugh. John smiled. He went to a museum and looked at the paintings and statues. Everything in the city was new to him. It was beautiful, but it was also busy and loud. As the days passed, John explored the city. He saw many different places. He went to the river that ran through the city. He saw people on boats, and he watched the water flow. He went to the market and bought some souvenirs. He walked around the big buildings and admired the tall skyscrapers. But after a few days, John started to feel lonely. The city was amazing, but it was so big and busy. There were so many people, but John didn't know anyone. He missed his village. He missed the peace and quiet. One evening, John sat by a fountain in the center of the city. The water flowed smoothly, and the lights reflected on the water. John watched it for a while, thinking about his village. The city is big, but it is not home, he thought. He decided that it was time to go back. The next morning, John bought a ticket for the train and began his journey back. The train ride was long, but John felt happy. He thought about everything he had seen in the city, but he also thought about the mountains, the fields, and his village. When John returned to his village, everyone was happy to see him. They asked, "How was the city?" John smiled and said, "The city is big, and it is beautiful. But I realized something. Home is the best place. The city is full of people, but it is not peaceful. I missed the mountains, the river, and the quiet mornings." John returned to his farm, but he was different now. He had seen the city, but he knew that the village was the place where he belonged. He was happy to be home. Years passed, and John became a storyteller. He told his story to children in the village. "The city is nice, but home is the best place," he told them. Never forget where you come from. John's story inspired many of the children. Some of them left the village, just like John had, but they always remembered his words. The city is big, but home is where the heart is. And so, John's story lived on. It was told from one generation to the next. The village was peaceful, and the people remembered that there is no place like home.